Hello, welcome to the February 1st, 2022 Club Cubase live stream. My name is Greg Undo, and we will get started here in just a couple minutes. I'm going to make sure my audio is working as expected. All right, that all seems, my monitoring computer seems to be working fine. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I will be the host for the live stream today. If you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you could ask questions in advance by sending an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de, or you could simply ask your question in the live chat field here. I'm presenting from outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching the live stream live, please feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. Within a few hours later tonight, I will have the index of all the topics covered in the live stream today with all of the timestamps. So you should be able to jump back to a particular section or find an answer to different topics that were covered. And if you wanted to search for different functions and different topics, you could go to cubaseindex.com, and Jan from Stockholm has been kind enough to compile that website for us. So I think there's over 15,000 topics and questions that you could find there that we've done on the live streams in the last 2 years. So a special thanks to Jan for that. We have two people that are serving as moderators for the live stream. So I want to give a special thanks to Agent K and to Jazz Dude. They're not Steinberg employees. They're just kind of doing this to make the community a better experience for everyone. So thanks for them. And also another wonderful resource of Steinberg information is compiled by Jazz Dude. Is the Cubase Nation Discord. So special thanks to all of his efforts in making this a better community for everyone. So, and when asking questions, it's helpful if we could specify which version of the program you're using, whether it's like Cubase 10, 10.5, 11, which level, whether it's LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, and which operating system. I will not be able to answer all the questions in a real-time manner, just because the amount of questions. I'll try to catch up to the best of my abilities. But if you don't see an immediate response to your question, please, if we could refrain from asking the same question repeatedly in the chat field, it just kind of slows everything down. And makes us not get through as many questions as possible. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. So just break out my chat here to a dedicated window. Okay, so I think when I broke out my chat, I may have missed a question. So let me just see if I could jump back. Hang on just a second. All right, so let me see, because sometimes when I do that, if questions were submitted in advance, I may not see them all. So let me see if I could catch. Okay, so I think, some of the questions that may have been submitted in advance I may have missed, so I apologize for that. So I will kind of start where my pop-out chat was. So I think I saw there was a question Marcos had asked about. I saw a question from Kevin Mehmed, and Marcos had asked a question about his UR22. So if you want to re-ask those questions, and I'm sorry if I missed a couple. All right, so we have, I see Benny from Sweden. Okay, so we just see, so So I think I've seen some discussion about Marcos and maybe getting noise with the ground loop on his UR22. So one thing you may want to check, Marcos, is to, see if you have a ground lift. Sometimes you can get like the little where you plug 3 prongs into 2-prong adapter. I know we have those in the US, and that may solve some problems. But if you want to ask the question again, we'll see if it could be in the chat field now that it's kind of officially started. So a question from Kevin. How come when I save a file in Cubase Pro 11 and automatically open up Wavelab Pro when it's finished saving a WAV file, 50% of the time it won't automatically open a WAV track? So make sure when you do this, when we do a file export audio mix down, make sure on the after export, we could just say open in Wavelab Pro 11, and that should automatically launch Wavelab, but make sure that it's actually going to be see if it's, maybe a particular file. If you're exporting to MP3, you may have to, have that decoded on importing into Wavelab. So, but just check to make sure that you're doing from the after export there, Kevin, and see if that works for you. All right, so we see Chance 2020 from Berkshire in the UK. All right, so we see we have Chris checking in from Jersey in the UK, Channel Islands. Thanks for joining us. All right, and we have Dave checking in from Wales in the UK. Says, I have a 2nd generation Focusrite Scarlett Solo, 7 years old. Would I get better ASIO performance from another more modern or expensive audio interface? The audio interfaces that do run USB 3 and can take advantage of it will give you lower latencies. So, that will, and there's also been in the last 7 years some pretty, some significant changes in converters. So you may benefit from that. I tend to keep stuff until it breaks or is no longer compatible, personally for my system. But, you probably can get a better interface. And I think that, if it's 7 years old, it's probably USB 2 interface. But, USB 3 will offer some performance advantages for latency, but it might get you down to 4 milliseconds from 10 or 8. Something like that. So you have to figure out if that is worth the investment. So if you're unhappy with your latency, then you could probably improve that by just simply, getting a more contemporary interface. All right, so we have Roland Klein checking in from Sweden, and we have Brian Sawyer from Beulahville, North Carolina. We have Kerwin Young checking in. I believe he's in Atlanta area. All right, so we see Jan from Stockholm. All right, so we have Alexander from Moscow. And we have Frank from the Netherlands. We have Sergey from Moscow. All right, so we have a question. Which plugins are best for drums mixing? So, one of my favorite plugins, that to use is maybe the envelope shaper. So if you haven't been using the envelope shaper, check that out. So let's say if I just wanted to put it on my drum, I'll just create a quick drum bus here for all of my drums, and I'll put my envelope shaper on it. I often call it kind of the anti-suck plugin for drums. So I'm going to add a group channel to all of my drums, and then I'll just put... So if I come here, let's go ahead and I'll put the envelope shaper, and we can find this under Dynamics. So I open this up. So what this is going to allow you to do is to take like the attack of the drums. So when people spend like hours trying tweaking compressors. So if I want to get like a really thick, long drum sound. Or if you want it really tight. So this is basically just taking the attack, the length and release of the samples. So if you want like a very tight 70s recording. And you want to make kind of the body of the drum come to life. So again, if we bypass that. And this is also available within the channel strip. So if you go to the tools, you could open up the envelope shaper directly there as well on every single channel. So that's a great plugin to work with drums. All right. All right, so we have Nick checking in from Essex in the UK. Thanks for joining us. And we have Rick checking in from Oregon. Okay, so we have a question from Marco. Hi, Greg. Can I add a macro or a key command to open a specific VST instrument? So I don't know if there's a key command to open a specific instrument. I know, you could save it as a track preset, but I think when we go to imported track preset, that it's going to still ask you to choose a particular preset. So there isn't necessarily a way, one quick way is to, if you come over here to the media menu and go to the VST instruments, that a lot of people miss is just kind of just drag and drop. But I don't know of a key command to open up a specific instrument. And sometimes those types of key commands can get tricky because once you set it up, then if you add additional instruments and change the names, it could be a little tricky to maintain. So I don't know of a macro or key command to open specific VST instruments, but a lot of people will actually, work with, particular templates so that the instruments are available if it's in the heat of a session. Okay, so we have Peter checking in from Montreal, Canada. Thanks for joining us again. All right, so we see, I think this just comment says, Greg, your work regarding these streams is simply amazing. Thanks for all. So you're welcome. I'm glad that I could be of help. All right, so we have Luca checking in from Munich, Germany. It was great to see you on I think this is Luca who's on the Zoom meetup. So it's great to see you on the Zoom meetup, as well as other people as well. Okay, so we have a question, maybe a strange question. What is the best bounce setting for the Hermode tuning, function clean or classic? And on with the master plugins on pre or post? Okay, so let's say if I wanted to come over here, let's go to... So I guess the Hermo is that the Hermode tuning? So I'm just going to reread this again. So what is the best bounce setting with the Hermode tuning, function clean or classic, or with the master plugins on pre or post? So I'm not sure if the Hermode tuning is the Hermode tuning. So, if we have the Hermode tuning here, that could be, for the specific instruments so that we could tune them for particular instruments, so instruments could be applied to different tuning scales, and we could set that up in the project setup. So where we could have the Hermode tuning type So you have kind of the, we could have this as being more for pop jazz or Baroque, those in specific keys or reference. So you could have, and we could have the depth setting, but it doesn't really have any effect on as we're bouncing audio. And on with master plugins on pre or post. So, so I'm not sure if it's the her mode tuning, but that's usually pretty independent of the audio bouncing or bounce selection or audio export. Okay, reading through some comments. Okay, so we have a question from Benny. I cannot get it with the settings in Wavelab 11. I want it as C11 to send sounds separately to my headphones. Find only monitors. Can you show me? Uses Windows 10. Let me just see if this is maybe from... Okay, so I'm just trying. So it's a question. I cannot get it with the settings in Wavelab 11. Want as is in C11 to send outputs separately to my headphones. Find only for my monitors. Can you show me? Use Windows 10. So let's take a look. So I'm not sure what audio interface you're using with that. Some of the audio interfaces will automatically mimic outputs 1 and 2 directly to, to the headphones. Okay, so let's say if we're... So let's say if we wanted to come over here, let's go to your file, to preferences, and we'll go to our audio connection. So, it could, if you wanted to, we could choose to have, different playback connections here. And let me just take a look. So once we have this setup, so yeah, it's hard to know without having kind of your particular audio interface, but you could have different speaker configurations. So let's say, okay, now I just wanted to add bus number 4. So, and at this point, if we add our buses, that when we, let's say if I come over here to playback and I'll add a second bus, and I'll assign this to speaker arrangement number 2, and this output is configured to, let's say to my DAW direct, which would be like a different output. So try clicking on plus here. And now when we go to edit, you could just say, okay, now I'm going to listen to my speakers. And then when I go to speaker configuration 2, that could be configured for your headphone output. So give that a try if that's what you're trying to do. And I just want to make sure if I'm understanding your question. But let me know, Benny. But again, go to the file, and then what you want to do is under preferences, audio connections, and here you could click on the plus, and then you could add a secondary bus, and then you could just, in the speaker configuration, you could switch between the different speaker sources right there. So, and one of those could be routed to headphones. All right, so Michael Pierce is on. Thanks for sending the pictures of all the wonderful vintage synths. And it was great to see you on the Zoom meetup as well. Okay, so we have a question from Peter. Just says, kindly go over the basics / benefits of using a VCA fader. Thank you. Okay, so come over here, activate this project. So some of the advantages of like a VCA fader versus other types of grouping and linking is how it's going to, one, not affect the gain structure of the tracks going to their aux sends, like to effects, and two, that if there's existing automation. So let's say I have this going on, and if I look at my mixer for my drums, that we have a lot of existing automation going on already. So what I want to do is to link all of these together, but still retain that automation. So I'm going to select the first and last tracks, and I'm going to add a VCA fader to the selected channels. So now I could bring the VCA fader down, and we could still, this will bring down all the drums, but as I do this, let's say I bring my VCA fader down, you'll notice that I could still have tracks with automation going up and going in a contrary motion. And as I bring tracks up, my VCA fader up, tracks will still be going down in their automation. So if I have kind of very precise automation already, I could come over here and automate the VCA fader. And I could attenuate all of these. So as I want to work with this now, so since we've automated the VCA fader, I come to look, and we see, when we look at the automation lines, I can see kind of what the actual automation is of the particular track. And then I could come over here and I could see the result of the VCA fader's attenuation on that particular track. So, and one of the beautiful things is I could come over here, and now that I do this, I could just say, I want to combine the automation with the VCA fader and with the particular tracks. So now one of the other benefits is, let's say I have too much reverb on my snare. So let's say I come here, and now as we listen to it, all right, so let's say now we have this level of automation. So as I bring down like my snare track here, that gain structure isn't going to affect the gain of the send going to the track. So I could bring and attenuate the tracks, but not affect the gain structure of it going into the effects. So once people have set up very meticulous effects levels on snares, and you wanted to then bring the drums all down or all up, you could then at that point not worry about that that relationship, that sonic relationship between the gain structure of those being altered by the VCA fader. All right, so we have a question from Robert Garrett. Can you tell us anything about Cubase 12? So as soon as Cubase 12 is released, we will go ahead and have, I'm sure, a nice live stream just with all the new features, but the only things that have been announced is that it's coming. It should be coming soon. It will be Apple M1 native, and it will use the new licensing system that does not require USB-E licenser. Other than that, we'll have to be a little patient until it's released. But I think it'll be a great release. Looking forward to, for everyone to see it. And Nick is impassionately saying, Dave the Songle. So that'll be our new motto. All right. So we see question: is it possible to play audio files double speed? Cubase 11 Pro. So if we have a particular audio file, so it depends. Like if we have tracks that are in musical mode, if you let's say if I take this particular project here and I wanted this to play at double speed, any track that will be set to musical mode. So if I just have all of these tracks selected here and they're all set to musical mode, and if I wanted to play double speed, all I'd have to do now is just change the tempo from, let's say, 100. If I type in 200, and now that the MIDI track should automatically do this by default, but and I had one track that wasn't in musical mode. So now or I want it to be 100 beats a minute. So make sure that we could select all the events and that they're in musical mode. And that when we could also do this from the pool window where we could select all the audio files and put them into musical mode. And once they're in musical mode, whatever tempo you have, whether it's 20% slower or 100% faster, you could just do it like that. So you could do it in real time. You could also select events and have the events do time stretching if you wanted to do offline time stretching. So if you have a particular audio file, you could select the audio file. So let's say, okay, just select an event here, and we could go to audio to processes, and you could say time stretch. And at this point, you could just, pick and choose, different scale factors for time stretching as well. So a couple different ways of doing that. I see Jazz Dude just mentions that in regards to Cubase 12, so Cubase 12 is not out yet. There will be no teasing. So, all right. Okay, so we see, hi Greg, when cycle recording MIDI in stacked mode, it usually results in the topmost activated take being blank because the recording is usually stopped shortly after the end of the phrase. This requires me to delete the top entry, then unmute the take underneath. Is there a way for Cubase to favor the take underneath if the latest take is empty or under a certain length? So I don't think it's going to, do it based on a particular length, but let's just give it a shot here. So let's do a new project. So, just okay, so I'll just put this into just a quick cycle record. So I don't think there's anything that will automatically do it based on length, but let me just come over here and we'll activate just, I'll go to my MIDI record mode. So, you know, one of the things you could do is just the stacked no mute. But let's go ahead and just okay, so let's say I did just a little bit of recording. We go to the lanes and let me just see if I could. Play one more note here. So yeah, so you might be able to say, let's say if I had this part, let me just remove my delete overlaps here real quick. So if you wanted to get rid of an event, you might be able to create a project logical editor. So let's say we want to maybe delete. So let's say we had a little bit of an event that's hanging over. So let's say I have that. So let's say if we could choose to delete container type equals event, and we will say the length of the event is less than right. So you might be able to create something like that, but I don't know of anything that would automatically kind of catch the event. But something that you may also want to do, let's say if we go to just take a look at a preference to see if there's a record mode. don't think there's a record mode to end at the left locator. So so you may have to manually do that, but you could experiment with maybe the Project Logical editor, and then you could, perhaps delete events that are shorter than like one measure. So that may be something to try. So sorry about that. Get my other laptop to wake up here. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. It says, hi, Greg, Frank from the Netherlands. Maybe a strange question. What is the best bounce setting? Okay, so we kind of covered that, the Hermo tuning. All right. Okay, reading through different comments. Okay, so you just see question, Cubase project files.cpr has a file limit of 4.27 gigabytes. This really is a limit for large templates. Is there a plan to address this in later Cubase versions? I can't really comment on upcoming, Cubase releases, but I know, I know people that are, running templates with 3,500 tracks and don't seem to have a problem, but the files can be large. Okay, so we see from Kevin, says information using Wavelab Pro, it won't load all WAV files. Can you use more than one WAV file at the same time for multi-tracking? So with Wavelab, if you want to do like a multi-track type of editing environment, so there's kind of the main editor, and that will work with that's intended for single audio files, and those files could be up to 22.2. But if you wanted to work with multi-tracks, probably what you need to do, Kevin, is as you come over here, is create a new, and you'll see an audio montage. So at this point, we could just say, okay, I want to create a new montage. I want this to be, let's say, stereo. You could do Ampisonics, multi-mono, DVD. So I'll just say stereo for now. And when we get to this point, you could click on the plus sign, and then you could add stereo tracks, add a mono track, add stereo tracks. And then you could just, you could choose to record directly into these particular tracks, or record or do this for like a multi-track editing for a podcast or a radio broadcast, so stuff like that. So go to the create a new, go to file to new audio montage, and you could start off here, and then if you wanted to create, and then you'll see the plus sign, then you could add more tracks from there. But it's not intended really to be like a multi-track DAW. It's more of an editing environment. All right, so we have Mikkel checking in from Canada. Hope I said your name correctly. All right. All right, so you see, hi, Greg. I have a simple question. How can I receive any order like MIDI, CC, or anything else when I'm starting record? So if you wanted to just record like MIDI, CC data, so let's say if I will come over to, let's say I have this track. So I'm just going to, so I'm not sure if you want it to record MIDI CC data. Let me just see if I could. Okay, so if you're just wanting to record CC, so I could play a note here and move my mod wheel and just record, or my pitch bend. So I can record pitch bend and modulation. So that'll just be recorded as normal, all within the part itself. So when we come over here, we could look and we could see that we'll have pitch bend data, and that we could have the modulation data just recorded directly into the track. So it does whatever is transmitted. If you have the MIDI record on, will be captured. So, but if I'm misunderstanding this is from Igal, let me know. Okay, so we have a question. Would you please explain quickly the options in VST audio system? All right, so let's come over here, go to our studio setup, and let's look at our VST audio system. So here we could choose which particular interface we're using. And once we have this set, depending on our buffer size, we could see our input and output latency, also kind of what the ASIO guard latency is, and that's going to allow you to run if ASIO guard is active, so the project could run at higher sample rates than what is actually like the tracks that aren't actively being recorded will run at higher buffer sizes. We can see the hardware sample rate. If you're working with video, you could have pull up and pull down to match with different digital audio sample rates for different frame rates. Under the advanced options, we could choose whether we want the processing precision in 32 or 64-bit. 64-bit could sound slightly better. It is subtle, and all the Cubase plugins will do 64-bit processing. If you have multiple processors, you'd probably by default have activate multi-processing. ASIO guard allows, as we mentioned before, tracks that will are actively being recorded, where we could choose those tracks to run at the lower latency and other tracks to run at a higher latency. So we could have audio priority. So, usually just leave this to normal. We have disk preload. This is like how much of the audio file of the audio will be kind of preloaded. We could also adjust for record latency, so that if you're recording, it knows what the latency is of the audio interface and compensates for that, or you could manually apply a record shift if you're processing through hardware in real time and it's not going to compensate. So usually you could leave those two settings the default value. All right, so we have Thermonuclear War checking in from Serbia. There he is. We have snow, freezing rain, melting rain. So, all right, so we have Michael Teams checking in from Weatherford, Texas. So I just see question, what is your opinion on Vienna Ensemble Pro setups? Do you think it's considerably better? What are your general thoughts about it? I personally don't run a Vienna Ensemble, so I haven't had that much experience. Obviously, many of our composer clients do. There are issues with integration with that, and some people are I've gotten a lot of frustrating calls of working with Vienna, I've seen a lot of composers recently kind of migrating toward having their system based on disabled tracks, and we'll have kind of a large template on a single computer and then enable tracks as they need them instead of having them constantly active, taking memory, taking processing. So I've seen a lot of people kind of migrating to having a large template with disabled tracks and then enabling them as needed. And a lot of people that have kind of migrated to that workflow, and it's kind of a newer workflow. Like I was just speaking with composer Paul Hasslinger, and he was just like, oh, I would never go back to, having everything farmed out to different computers. But it could really be, it's obviously used by a lot of people, but I don't have personal experience. I don't have a license of it. All right, so just seeing a lot of discussion of Marcos's, I guess he's getting buzz in his particular, seems like he's getting buzz in his audio interface setup. So, the best thing that when kind of, diagnosing these problems is, to take it at the most basic level. And I know I missed some of the early discussion when you probably discussed some of the details of this, Marcos, but, play audio in your play audio in your computer, with the built-in interface on your computer, and see if you have noise. Add the USB interface and listen to headphones and see if you add noise. Add a external monitor if you're using a laptop, see if that adds noise. Add the speakers, and run the laptop on batteries, run the laptop plugged in, change the plugs, and just add one thing and methodically add one other thing, and then you could isolate where the noise is being introduced. I know it's kind of frustrating to do that, and sometimes it's just bad buildings that will do that. There was going to be a Smithsonian Museum for Music based in DC, and Yamaha was supporting it with some gear, and and they called me once when the whole system was just buzzing, and every time they hooked up speakers, it was a really loud buzz. So I got the call to kind of go in and see if I could figure out what the problem was, and it was just a ground lift. So we went to, at that time, Radio Shack, and got a ground lift adapter, and that fixed all their problems. So, and it could be just wiring in your particular building could also be causing that. So there's some things in methodologies maybe to help isolate that. All right, so we have a question from Rudy, and he had mailed this in, but since he asked, we'll go through it. It says, I'm a bit late to the party, not sure if my question was answered. Is it possible to select MIDI notes that fall on certain beats? For example, every eighth hi-hat? Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll show you some tricks. We could do this with the logical editor. Just open up a Groove agent here quickly. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and create the drum map for it. And let's say I just want to put in some hi-hats. Okay, so right now I look at this and we'll just say, okay, I only want, so let's say I have my velocities here, and let's say I'll just knock all the velocities to 64. Okay, so what I want to do is to select like every other note, every eighth note, or notes that are on offbeats. So let's say I'll look at this where you can see in bars and beats. So I just painted in 16th notes. And let's say I wanted to select notes that, you know, were on the and of the bars. So if we wanted to, we could say, let's grab our logical editor. And we want to transform. We're going to say type is equal to notes. And we want to say our position is going to be, and we could say inside bar range. So I could say, okay, I only want the notes. So, and we could do this a couple of times. Okay, so we'll say inside bar range, and we could create kind of like for a whole bar. So this is beat 1. We'll say this is beat 2. It's beat 3. It's right here at this line. Then we have beat 4. Okay, so now if I wanted to come over here, we could say, you know, if I wanted A to select those notes that fall, and I'll just choose. Okay, so let's say now we could just come over here and we could choose the notes that fall within, and we could be more precise with these numbers here. So, you know, we could make those graphically a little smaller. So now you can say, okay, the notes that are on the upbeats, we can now come over here, and once we have those selected, so we could say, okay, I just want these to be at specific points within the bar, let's say the upbeats. And now we could do stuff like, okay, I wanted to quantize those now that they're selected, or I could say we're going to take value 2, which is the velocity, and I wanted to add 20. So now I could just say, and for this, we would choose our to transform. So I could say, let's take those notes and just add a velocity value of 20. So again, come over here and say you want to say type is equal to note, position, choose inside bar range, and then here you get kind of a graphic of the 4/4 bar. And at that point, you can say I want it to quantize. If you want to do that, you could select, then quantize, or just say I wanted to adjust the velocities to bring those up, or do different functions like that. So let me know if that works for you, Rudy. And thanks for sending your questions in via email. All right, so we have this is 2 questions in one, Greg. Your top 5 stock FXs and also instruments in Cubase, and second, why you love Cubase, some features which other DAWs haven't. Thanks. So I think Groove Agent is a really fabulous instrument. So, you know, if we're handling just about any type of drum task where it's going to be like acoustic drums, like a virtual drummer, or doing MPC styled. So I think that's a really great workhorse. Other instruments, I think that the Retrolog is kind of a beast of an analog synthesizer. I have lots and lots of other analog synthesizers, and once you kind of get to know Retrolog, I tend just not to use them. So if I'm going for any kind of virtual analog, that's a great solution. Other instruments, Halion is a beast. It's not a part of Cubase, but if I had to have one desert island instrument, it would be Halion, because that could do so much. Wonderful kind of for ethereal sounds. I think Pad Shop is pretty spectacular as well for doing granular synthesis. So for pianos, I really like the Grand. I find that to be really fantastic. Audio plugins, the Reverence Convolution Reverb, the Envelope Shaper that we saw earlier. I really like Squasher, and tend not to use it on, it's kind of intended for doing EDM type functions, but I use it in a lot of other different things. And frequency EQ is, very surgical and sounds great with lots of options. So those are, it's probably 6 plugins. So it says, why do I love Cubase? Some features which other DAWs haven't. I haven't run another program, so in 30 years, 31 years, so it's been a long time. And I haven't really felt the need to, but I like that Cubase doesn't predispose me for particular workflows. So if I needed to do like an orchestral composition, I could do that. If I needed to do a hip hop track the next day, I could do that and have kind of all the tools. If I needed to record a band, all those different tools, whereas I find people are, I run this program for MIDI, I run this program for loops, I run this one for audio, and it's just like, if you're running 3 programs, maybe you're running the wrong programs. And I like that Cubase is, really doesn't, predispose me to a particular type of music or particular types of projects. And I kind of like the freedom that it gives you with workflows and capabilities. Sometimes it's like a wild horse that you ride, and but I always feel that as I'm kind of go down a really dark corner of the program, that someone was there trying to think of my workflow ahead of me. And maybe there's 5 ways of doing something, but in different scenarios, you want to do that one function this way when you're here, and another way when you're in a different part of the program. And I find that all those different workflows with the kind of the historical legacy of is very powerful. But at the end of the day, Cubase was the program that first, and you see that Steinberg is like the program that comes up with innovations. So if we want to come here, stuff that we take for granted, that we edit music while it plays, that I could see all of my tracks here. It used to be that you would have like almost like this really cryptic event list 30 years ago, but every program has migrated to this paradigm that Cubase really defined. And like these, right clicking to access your tools and the functionality, that hasn't changed in since 1989, because it was right then. So it's always fascinating to see where Cubase is going in the future. So those are some of the reasons that I love Cubase. All right. Okay, just reading through comments. Thanks for all the great discussions. All right, so just see a question from Don M. Says, hi, Greg. I purchased Groove Agent 5 yesterday and don't have it in my instrument track drop-down menu. Also, it opened in Standalone, but does not have any samples or kits. Cubase 11, Windows 10, 64. So, if you're doing that, make sure that, so let's come over here to the Steinberg Download Assistant. So sometimes when you get this, if you entered in your download access code, you'll see it kind of pop up under your products here. So let me just cancel out of that for now. I'll update my e-licenser later. Okay, so let's say if we go to our VST instruments and plugins, and we have now come over to Groove Agent 5, so make sure that you have, all of the different content. So, when you come over here, you'll see that you'll have content update for the kit. You'll see kind of, content here is going to be, all of these different files. So, when you go to the content to Groove Agent, that is downloaded and installed for you. Already had it, so I didn't download it from here. But, sometimes people will just install Groove Agent 5 and not all of the content. So that's a separate download. So make sure that you've done that. And if you installed it as a VST3 plugin, it should automatically show up. You might have had the option to install it as a VST3 or an AU or AAX. So make sure that you have it as a VST3 plugin when you do the install, but it should automatically show up for you. So. All right, my chat field jumped on me, so let me just try to find my spot. All right, so we see, can you use WAV files from the Reason Rack in Cubase or Reason Standalone program? So I'm not sure if those are WAV files. Sometimes, programs will have audio files that are going to be tied and only accessed from the particular application. So if the WAV files are intended to be used as regular WAV files, or if they're fixed to being running within Reason, like I know that Steinberg has content that's fixed to run inside of Cubase with all the metadata and isn't really accessible for other people. So it could be something similar to that. So if you can't access the WAV files from the Reason Rack, then it could be fixed to the application. So, and that would be a design decision by Propellerhead. All right, so we have Tech Talk from Sean checking in from India. Thanks for joining us. All right, we have Matthew Elston checking in from London. He just says he loves the stream and the detailed knowledge is really helpful. So thanks for being a part of the community today. So I just see, Greg, the transverse bar at the bottom that scrolls the project left and right. Is there a keyboard or mouse tweak that can make that easier to use, since I need that as much as the P key? Thanks. So if we have, and I think it's probably going to be just like this little line here. So one of the things you could do is, if you have a mouse button, just push the mouse button down, And then you could drag your project here. So think of that. And another method to kind of navigate is just to, if you hold the shift key and use the mouse scroll wheel, you can navigate left to right, in time in the project. So that's what I tend to do. So whatever, tool I have selected, just hold down the shift key and move the mouse scroll wheel, and then you can navigate the project just like that without having to find a particular area. So again, shift and mouse scroll wheel up and down. So I think that works really well, and you don't really have to, move, it's only 2 fingers needed. So let me know if that works for you. Okay, so we just see, hi, I'm having trouble with hi-hats using Arpeggiator. So a lot of times when we deal with an arpeggiator, so let's say if I just wanted to just open up just find a quick bass part here to show this. All right, so we'll come over here with our 1984 DX7 bass sound. All right, so a lot of times when we do this, we may say, okay, I open up my Arpeggiator now. So as soon as we go to the Arpeggiator plugin, I can now and we could do this, but if I wanted to do it for drums, it's, when you say you're having problems with hi-hats, so what that's doing is actually just taking the particular chord that I'm playing, and so when I come here to the Halion Sonic, I'll just hold down, let's say, a simple chord part. So I'll just create an empty part here so you can see. So, and what that's going to do, but now if I do this for drums, it's playing the different notes. So if you hold a chord down, it'll play. It's going to do arpeggiators, but if you hold a single note down, I could just have that, do the arpeggiator. So I just hold this down, and let's say, okay, if I don't hold down a chord, I could say, okay, I want this to be, 30-second notes. And if we wanted to be able to adjust, different functions here. So, but, regardless, whatever sound I hit will just be that. But if you play a chord, it'll play back, all of the notes, and those notes may not make sense. So if you're doing it for a hi-hat part, try to just hold down, so you could say, okay, now I want this to be, 8th note triplets. But if I hold down multiple sounds. And you could come up with beats like this if you wanted to. So, but you realize that, you know, if you're doing it playing a chord, that it may play other sounds. But if you just hold down just a hi-hat key, that it'll only be able to derive that note to do the arpeggiators, and then you could just do kind of the quick note repeat stuff. All right, we see Michael Teams is giving out the ice cream, so always a welcome addition to the live streams. Thank you, Michael. All right, so we see Mark Rabin. He's on the way to the airport. So it was great to see you on the Zoom meetup on Friday. All right, Michael Pierce has countered Michael Team's ice cream with a curried potato and spinach soup, garlic, chilies, ginger, and some curry leaves, and a dollop of cream. So that sounds good. Very creative. All right, so we see Eric Ross just saying, I finally figured out live looping recording in Cubase, and it's changed my whole recording process. Just want to say thanks. That's great. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to export lots of small audio regions that are on the same track? Okay, so let me just do a new project. All right. Okay, so let's say we wanted to export each of these as their own files. I think we could do this with render in place. Let's take a look. So we'll come over here to the render settings. So here we could choose a file path. So I'm just going to put it into desktop, and we'll create a new folder. Okay, and what I want to do is, instead of these being as one event, I wanted to do this as separate events. So let's say I have all of these files, and I could just now choose to so we have so let's come over here to my Finder and go to our recents file. Let's see if it shows up there. All right, so we go to a small export, and there is all of the files. So go to the export audio mixdown, or not the export audio mixdown, but the render in place, to render settings. You want mode set to separate events, and we could choose to just keep the source tracks unchanged if you want it. So I'll just undo that. So again, render in place, go to your render settings. So we could keep those unchanged, or we could just disable the source tracks or mute the source tracks. And we could define our folder directly there. So then that should do the trick. All right, so we see Benny just saying thanks, Greg. Now it works with my headphones and Wavelab 11, so it's great. Thanks for letting me know. So we see Michael Pierce just saying, I hear the northeast of the USA is getting a pounding this week, though. So yeah, I think up like Boston area got hit pretty hard. So they're calling it was great marketing for the storm, called it a bomb cyclone. So it's kind of like a Category 3 hurricane in winter. So we got about an inch or two here in DC. All right, so we see Graham Witchers saying hello to everyone who's hoping for another revelation of the day. All right, we'll try to give you one, Graham. So you see any hints on Cubase 12 other than the ending of the E-licenser dongle, any release date? So there hasn't been a release date announced. You know, we don't like to tease. So you know, when it's ready, you'll know all about it, and so it'll be great. All right, so we see from Frankie Ducks as a second question. When do set plugins pre or post on master? What do you prefer? So, you know, a lot of people would do it, you know, if you're doing something on the master bus, you know, it could really, you know, depend on, you know, so let's say if we wanted to put an effect on the master bus, you know, it could depend entirely on the effect as well. But let's say if we come here and I wanted to put an effect, and you know, it's really if you want the gain staging of the effect to be affected by the volume. So, you know, let's say we have this on a limiter. I will come over here. So let's just say, okay, we'll have a maximizer on. Okay, so let's say now we'll play this, and I'll just make sure we're not going to kill everyone volume-wise. So now that we have this post fader that you know, that won't really have an effect on the particular processing. So let's say, okay, we'll turn this on, and I'll kind of get the same gain structure going to the maximizer if I adjust this. But if I have this in my pre-fader, you know, this is feeding how much is going into. So we look at our input here of the plugin. You know, we could see, we just move this here. All right, so now, you know, when we adjust kind of our gain structure, we can see that how that's going to be hitting our dynamics. But now when I do this, it doesn't affect the gain structure going into the processing. So depending on the plugin and the mix, you know, you could just kind of play around with the settings. Sometimes you may want it to be pre-fader, sometimes you may not. You know, it's not a hard and fast rule for particular plugins. It's really up to the particular situation. All All right, so we see Jeff Sabelski is Smasher number 34. If you do learn something new in a live stream, make sure that you actually hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. All right. Okay, so we see from Michael Teams, howdy Greg, please run through setting a chord track up, include the decision on why you would choose which track to use as the guide. Thank you. So a lot of times when I would just kind of start a project, and like when I get some of the hot mess projects, one of the things that I will often ask for is a chord track or what the chords are. So, and I'll just kind of show what I do. Like, when I get like a track to play bass on, so like here, like this one was a pretty straight chord progression, but a lot of times what I do, let me see if I can find another example here. Looking forward to getting some more hot mess tracks to play on, but I may have another one to kind of show this. So often what I do is, I will start a chord track and I'll just do like a new version here. And as I'm kind of just coming up with the particular song ideas, I will just, kind of just put the chords in as like a guidepost. And I think of this as like, like when I would play jazz, I would just get the chord charts and I would, just come over there and I would play all my bass lines, and it's pretty typical just to have a chord chart. Nashville, they do number systems so that, if you go from like a 1 to a 4, like we see here, that if the singer can't see, and they're like, if they can't sing in a particular key, they may just kind of go from, drop it down a half step. So you go B to E. So, but I would just kind of come over here and pick and choose and just to have this as like a reference. So often what I do, so, you just, as you're kind of working, just kind of paint the chords in. Now you could have tracks, MIDI tracks and audio tracks follow the chords or not by going into the chords here. So many times I may have the MIDI follow chords, but I may not want to affect the performance. So I may not want to have audio follow chords because it's only going to be for like vocals and bass, like a monophonic, something that's not playing a chord. So when I'm working, I will just come here and just say, okay, as we're doing this, so I know exactly what chords to play.
Quiet in the courtyard, good souls undercover.
So instead of having like a typical chord chart that goes in a sheet of music, I could just come right over here.
Whispers at the window, cold winds roaming the streets, cloud castle shadow vio carre, nightmares flood your sleep, nightmares flooding your sleep,
So I just use that as to always kind of be aware of what chords are going on. But then like as I'm recording, I could just kind of watch the chords and see it going on. And if I needed to see this in a score, where I could just say, okay, I need it to see, like this whole event in the typical chord chart, I could just come right over here, let's go to the score editor. So let's say, and we'll switch this to page mode. And at this point, I could just say, okay, as we want to work with our chords, I could, we'll just come over here to advanced layout, and I'll just say show chord track. And now I could just see kind of the chord track just laid out for me. So so again, just to kind of start, you can just right click, and then, if you have a MIDI keyboard, you can just double click, you could just play a chord in, it will tell you the chord, or you could extract it from a MIDI part, or you could say, okay, this is a F suspended to 7th with an A flat in the bass, some really obscure chord. Sometimes I just like to throw my hand on the keyboard controller and see what chord will actually be created from that. And that will populate the chord field for you. So when I'm recording, that's, why, I often ask for chords from people so that I could just input these and always have an idea. And if I needed to emphasize a particular region, so let's say I needed to change the rhythmic feel for this, often what I would do is just kind of colorize a different color for the chords where I may need to do like an accent or something. So that's how I often use chord track. All right, and we see Michael has generously donated to me a gallon of Texas Pralines ice cream. I'll share it with my family. So my son got a good report card yesterday, so we'll give some to him. All right, so Peter says, thank you for the explanation of the VCAs. He's like, I realize the question's been asked ad nauseum, much appreciated. So now we're always here to help people with their questions. So all right, Nick is saying that well played to Jeff Sabelski for mentioning that he was Smasher number 34. He says that like button will not smash itself. So, all right, so we have Uno Memento from Finland. Thanks for joining. Okay, so we see from Eric Ross, Greg, when recording multiple tracks is there a way to have one or a selection of plugins on that input channel so that any audio channel that has that input has those effects already on them? So when we have input channels, we could have effects on the input channel. And these effects will be embedded on the particular file. So if I was recording a guitar part and I go to distortion and say, okay, I want the VST amp rack. So as soon as I come over here, if that's on an input channel, it will automatically, that effect is kind of burned into the audio recording itself. So there's not much of a case for taking those same settings that have been burned into the file and then being able to have the same effects on the audio track itself, because you'd be running it through the same effects. And I think that if I wanted to come here to my input channel, and let's say if I just come over here to using a track preset, I could come over here. So I think, let me see if my input output channels. Yeah. So that's why, so we could have kind of different, effects chains that will be preserved. So let's say if I come to my input channel, I could just say, okay, now what I want to do is, let me just see if we could. So I'll just click here just to the right of the inserts, and I'll say, let's save effects chain preset. And we'll call it Eric. Ross. Okay. And now when I come over here to, let's say this, I'll add an audio track. All right, so now when we come to this particular track, I could say, let's load an effects chain preset. And we could just say, okay, here's the Eric Ross preset that we just made. So we could do it like that. But, again, it's not where, and we may be able to, let's see if we come here to, all right, so I'll just kill this one. Let's just get rid of these. Another way to copy over like insert effects, you might be able to let's see if we can do it from so, but you could copy, and then let's say if we come here, and paste as well. So that's some other ways of doing that, but generally it's not, some people will, record and not put the inserts in on the input stage, and will record and mix and have the effects on the channel that they're recording, and that way the dry signal is recorded and you could just have the effects here. And if you don't have that working, it could be, like where you don't hear the effects until afterwards. It's select your audio interface and make sure to disable direct monitoring. Otherwise, the inputs go directly to the audio outputs of your audio interface and not through the software effects. Hey, Greg, can you please show me how to access all of the free Apple plugins in Cubase and my other DAWs? They're all available, but not in Cubase, specifically AU pitch plugin. So, Cubase doesn't run AU plugins, but, if you're looking for, I'm sure there's a VST equivalent, but if you wanted like the pitch plugin, if it was like for like, pitch correction, you could probably come right over here and just say, okay, there's pitch correct. So if you wanted to do that or use Very Audio, but yeah, Cubase doesn't run AU plugin, so that's why it doesn't work. So you'd need to have a VST version of the particular plugin that you want. Read through comments. So we see people wanting to save the dongle. You can still use your dongle as the future goes on. All right. All right. So just see, hello, Greg. I was wondering if you received my email question about the chord track and pads I sent last week. So let me just go ahead and open that up. So I had a couple of questions I didn't get to last week, but let me just jump to some of those. Give me a second to load up my document from. And it was great to see you on the live stream or the Zoom meetup, John. Hope your lasagna turned out well. Okay, so John Costigan's question from last week that he had mailed in is, how would I go about using the chord chart and chord pad to study and compile most jazz chords while learning to compose using them? I feel there's an opportunity here to use both music theory and ear training to power up my songwriting, but I would appreciate any suggestions you might have. So what I would do if you wanted to kind of study about jazz harmony, so jazz harmony is like a really good use case for chord track. There's kind of the big, and this was kind of a way to get around paying for publishing and publishers. There's a series of books called The Real Book. And the concept, I believe, if the legend was, basically they don't want to pay for having all of the music, so they would have the melody and the chords, and this is what many jazz musicians use. Now, the Real Book could also, one of the things that you'll notice a lot about jazz stuff is, you could just find Real Book PDFs online pretty easily. So they're pretty freely available. You can still purchase the book and then just enter those particular chords into the chord track or chord pads. So if you wanted to come here and let's say, let's add just a quick instrument track, and we're going to add, let's say, just a quick kind of electric piano. And I'll turn my keyboard to the right computer now. All right, so let's say I just want to come here and let's add a chord track. So one of the things that you'll notice with a lot of jazz stuff is, there's definitive patterns, just like there is in classical music, like there is in rock music and blues music. So, but one of the patterns that you'll notice in a lot of jazz compositions is, just a circle of fifths. A lot of keys will be in flats. There will be more kind of horn-friendly keys. So you'll see a lot of guitar music that's in like E, A, D, G, C. You'll see a lot of, jazz music that's going to be in like the flat keys. So you'll see more like F, B flat. So, but one of the things that you'll do when you go to the chord assistant, you could actually kind of see the circle of fifths. So a lot of times when you are doing this, you could just enter the chords in, find some jazz compositions that you like. And what you do is just kind of come right over here. You can go to the chord assistant and you can say, okay, if we're doing this in F, so the next chord, I want it to be, B flat. So I could just say, okay, now I'll just go B flat to E flat to A flat. Let's say D flat. All right, so this is, and then you could have, various voicings as well. So let's say, okay, now we're at G flat. I want to go to B, as my next chord. So let's say G flat, we'll add a chord. And then you have to kind of do what's often called, a turnaround. So we'll say, okay, we're starting at B flat. So I'm going to go B to, let's say E. And, you can obviously keep the majors and minors within the key. And then we'll go F back to B flat. So, find some of these, find, great classic jazz chords. And at this point, we could say, you know, as we go to, you know, audition, then we'll have our turnaround back to our tonic key. And then at this point, we could just say, okay, I want it to come right here and say assign pads from the chord track. And then we'll say, okay, and now, and let's say, okay, what if this one was, you know, my voicing or my tension? If I switch that to, so we go. So let's say now I want this to be an E7th chord, you know, so you could just kind of, so you can say, okay, now I just want to have different coloration. So let's say, okay, I will come here, add. So, you know, but just kind of enter in chord progressions like that. And at that point, you could just automatically take the chord tracks, you know, chord pads to the chord tracks, or the chord tracks to the chord pads. So, but it's a great way to kind of study the different harmonies, and you realize that it'll just be different patterns, and rock guys have patterns, jazz guys have patterns, Baroque composers had patterns, you know, and once you kind of recognize these patterns, it'll be, yeah, it's interesting perspective on music. Okay. All right, so we have Trond, who checked the like button in Norway. Thanks, Trond, for doing that. Okay, so I just see, hi Greg, I'm trying to import a MIDI map from a Pro Tools project, MIDI map into Cubase. It has loaded all the markers and everything correctly, but the tempo is still on the default 120 BPMs. So I guess it's a MIDI file. So let's say if I wanted to come to the MIDI file settings, there is a setting here. So let's go to your preferences, and under MIDI file, what you want to do is to just, by default, this is checked, says ignore master track events on merge. Try to uncheck that, and that way the tempo and time signature information should be carried over when imported. So once again, go to your preferences under MIDI file, and uncheck ignore master track events on merge. I'm not sure why why it's checked by default. I tried to get that changed and brought it to people's attention. So, but try unchecking that preference, and I think you'll be all set. All right, so we have Tiago checking in. Thanks for joining us. Or you see Graham Witcher's hit the like button at number 40, so thanks for doing that. All right, so we have Pascal checking in from Holland. Thanks for joining, being a part of the community. See, Graham's going to take a little break to walk his dog with his daughter. Enjoy. All right, so we have a question. Can you please point the old problem with importing audio files? Some users have different tempo and so on. So, depending, not all programs will tempo stamp, so sometimes people will start a project and they don't really have, so like a lot of times in Cubase, we start with like measure 1, measure 3, measure 5. So our default time meter may be set to bars and beats. Some people just record in seconds. Like if you're recording a band, they may just record in absolute time. So they're not thinking bars and beats. They just kind of hit record and the musicians play. And there's no real correlation between the performance and bars and beats. So sometimes, people may have like their project set to, 96 BPM, but if they're just have this set to seconds, their project, if they never turn the click on and they just record, will, just kind of like an analog tape. We don't really think of it as having like a tempo or a bar and beat. It's just time that we have to fill. So many audio engineers will work with, just their primary time format set to seconds, or if you're in post-production, it might be set to time code, but not to bars and beats. So the tempo that they have, and as we record an audio file into Cubase, it will assume the tempo of the event. But if you don't have the click track on and you're just recording just to kind of take space, to occupy space, that tempo correlation may not have any musical sense to the file. So that's often when people run into and getting files from someone that may have a tempo stamp that has nothing to do with the audio files. So, and if that's the case, you may select the files and then have Cubase do a tempo detection from the project menu. So at that point, you could just choose to do, once you have an audio file imported, that the tempo detection to figure out what tempo is actually recorded. All right, so we have Soren in Sweden checking in. And he got his song played on national radio, I guess, in Sweden now. So Cubase power. So it's wonderful. Congratulations. It's always great to hear your song. I remember when I was like 21, 22, and a song I mixed got on, for a local band, got on kind of heavy rotation for a local station. So I remember just kind of driving down to mix a session and hearing one of the mixes on the radio. So it's always fun. All right, so just see, is there a more definite explanation to using Apache 5 for Cubase 11 in Windows 10? Okay, so let's go ahead and... Okay, so let's say... so let's say I'm just going to hold a chord down. So let's come over here to the Apache plugin. So we'll just go to MIDI inserts. So now at this point, I'm going to just play a chord. So we could change the play order. So if I wanted to go down, then up, or always up, or always down, or random. Now, when I come over here, we could say, okay, I want my step size to be quarter notes. Or let's say dotted eighths, 16ths, or let's say 16th triplets. So, and then we could also adjust the length. So if I wanted those notes to ring out a little longer, or if I wanted those to be very staccato, we we could set our key range. So I'm just playing down to one chord, but I could have it be like 2 octaves, or if I want it to be 3 octaves. So, and then if you wanted to get into more Apache SX, at this point you have kind of like your classic so, but we could also take sequences. So if you have like a particular pattern, you could drag and drop that pattern and use that as the basis for the arpeggiation. Okay, so I see a question about recording the CC, the misunderstood, sorry about that. And just says, I don't want to record CC MIDI, I want to have an output when I start recording. So do you want, I'm not sure what you want, you know, so when you say I want to have an output when I starting recording, so I'm not sure if you want to have a CC trigger the recording or if you want, or so I don't understand the question. I'm sorry if I'm being dense, but maybe if you could ask in another way, or if someone else understands what Egal is trying to convey to me. Sorry about that. All right, so we have a question. If I lose or break a dongle, is it possible to order another? Is the manufacturer dongles continuing, or is it likely that within a year or two the replacement dongles will be a thing of the past? So I think that they'll still be manufacturing them for a while, but you know, at some point it won't be manufactured. So if you want it to maintain to get a fresh dongle, I would consider maybe getting an additional e-licenser dongle and having a backup while they're still readily available. And that way, if 20 years from now you wanted to transfer, you'd be able to. Okay, so I see kind of more of a clarification from Egal. It says, let's have an example. I want to turn on a light when I started the record. If I stop, the light will turn off, or mute the monitors. I could do external things, but I need the output from Cubase. So I think Nuendo has some of this capability with GPIO capabilities, but there are a lot of different signs. There are signs that just follow record messages. So like when you hit record, that this light will turn on. Like you could program it to as soon as you hit record that the light turns on. But a lot of times those will be set up through like a GPIO. And I know like the Yamaha Nuage will allow you to do that, but most of the events, most of those can respond to, I remember there's a company that was doing it, and I met the sales rep at a NAMM show, and it just responds to MIDI messages. Like when you hit record, that it would automatically send out the message for the record light. So, but you could definitely, there are MIDI devices that will respond to, like when you hit the record key on your computer, that it will automatically follow. It's not necessarily Cubase sending out a message, but the device will just do it via MIDI. I could do some research on it. If you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, So thanks for the clarification. Okay, just all right, so you see, can you have a keyboard with mod wheel at the same time and have automation on the track with the mod wheel together? So, you know, if you're going to be having modulation on the track, so let's say if I wanted to come over here, so let's say if I have a retro log, and let's say I'll have this particular track, so I'll just record. So let's say I'll just, so I'll just record some of the modulate. I'll just record this with mod data on it, just so we could hear. All right, so I'll just take our track and I'll just do it on the retro log here. Mute. So we'll just come here. All right, so now I'm going to move my mod wheel. All right, so I'll move it up again. We can see kind of the little lines, and I'll move the... Okay, so now that I have that information, so I can see where the mod wheel was, where we did it here with these ramp ups and downs. So while it's playing, I can still, but it's gonna try to play back once it sees that continuous controller. I can still kind of overwrite the information, but but MIDI is only going to be able to kind of play back, that particular, one instance of that particular. So if we look at modulation here, so as soon as it's playing back, I can come right over here. So if I wanted to move the mod wheel and then let it play back the data, I could kind of overwrite it and it will jump temporarily, but as soon as I let go of the mod wheel and it's not writing any new data, it will revert back to the existing modulation data. Okay. Okay, so I just see question, is there a way to cut MIDI events without deleting the notes that overlap the cut? Okay, so let's... Okay, so I think that when you... All right, so let's see if I understand this. So is there a way to cut MIDI events without deleting? Okay, so when, let's say I have these long notes here and I cut the event, and then we see that the notes here have been split. So I'll look at I'll switch to velocity view here. So now when I split the event, if I'm understanding correctly, you see that this is one long note, and I split the event, that the notes themselves get split. And this is just a preference. So if we come over here to preferences, to editing, and to MIDI, you'll see split MIDI events. So if I uncheck that now, I could split the events here, and then the actual MIDI events themselves won't be split. So try going to preferences, to editing, to MIDI, and then you could uncheck split MIDI events. All right, so David Griffiths wants everyone to hit the like button. So, okay, so I just see a question: why is VST2 support discontinued? So, VST, the SDK, was discontinued about 4 years ago. So Steinberg is still supporting VST2. Steinberg did announce that it, in 2 years, probably will not be supporting VST2. So there's a lot of confusion with the announcement, but it's in 2 years, and this is just kind of the heads up that, 2 years from now, the Steinberg host won't be supporting VST2. VST3 has been out since 2008. So it's 14 years old. So by time, at least in the United States, by time, VST3 was released, if you were born when that was released, and you could have a driver's license if you, have gone, so it'll be 16 years after Cubase 3 was released. So, so it's not being dropped right now. So it's within 2 years. This is just how Steinberg is being very kind of proactive in communicating to the markets that, probably, in more than 2 years, we won't see versions of the host programs that will be supporting VST2, because VST2 isn't going to work with like Apple M1 processors. So, there's lots of technical reasons why, we just have to kind of move on, but it's a 2-year warning. All right, so we have a question: any date on Cubase 12? Maybe. So, generally I can't really share any information because, if I knew, I would be under a non-disclosure agreement. So, but, we'll let you know as soon as it's available, as we don't like to necessarily tease with, with feature announcements, months in advance. It doesn't do anyone any good, so. So I just see, so Greg say Cubase 12 will have separated production and mixing parts. So again, we can't speculate on what's going to be in Cubase 12, but, I wouldn't anticipate that. I would say it would be, some people think of Cubase as just a mixing program. Some people think of it as just a production program. Some people think of it as just a composition program, but it could do all 3 of those facets really well. So I don't see a discontinuation in that philosophy. Okay, so we have a question. Each of the saturators and distortions in the channel strip have a high frequency and HF and LF knobs. Can you please show how they work? I can't tell if they're filters or gain knobs. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump to a project. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. And if you have questions you want to email or more in-depth, always send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de, or you could simply Ask them in the chat field, and make sure you hit the like button. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the saturators here. So let's say, okay, and put that into a loop. So yeah, it's just kind of like the high frequency content and low. So let's say if we go to our high frequency adjust, so this would be the frequency that you're adjusting here. So as we boost the frequency, so say I want to boost around 3K, or if I wanted to boost around 7K, so that's the particular frequency. And let's listen to the low frequency. So we can hear it on the kick drum. And let's go ahead and look at tape saturation. So again, this is kind of, on this one, it's going to be the filter. So let's say we want to drive. And now we go to the tube saturation. And this would be our filter as well. So here in the high frequencies there. And let's just boost the drive here. So you can hear the low end. So you hear kind of the high ends, especially in the hi-hat, they're just kind of go away. So it's going to be high and low filters on the tube saturation and the tape saturation, and high and low frequencies on magneto. So let's see. So Jeff Sabelski is saying Cubase 12 is past Jupiter and is approaching Mars when it begins preparing for deceleration before Earth's orbit. So I think there's already some hit records that have been maybe done in it. So. Okay, my chat field jumped on me, so. Okay, so I think I'm back to where I was. Okay, so you see when I change the tempo, the grid size changes too. Is there a way to turn this off? Okay, so let's come over here. Let's see if we have a tempo track. Okay, so let's say if we adjust our tempo here. All right, so here when I look at this, my grid size is constant regardless of the tempo. But if we have this in bars and beats, that as we adjust our tempo, because we're adding or deleting time, so it depends on your master time format. So if I come here and I do tempo changes, we'll see that change because we are basically adding more time. And then if we have this set to bars and beats as our master time format, because it's the beat that we're looking at, we don't see those changes. So try to just make sure that it will make perfect sense if you're in seconds, that if you do If you slow down the tempo, you know that it will change, or you speed up the tempo, that those will change accordingly, but you won't see those change when you're in bar and beat mode. So let me know if that makes sense. So I just see from Jazz Dude says, if I was Steinberg, I wouldn't miss the biggest trade show in Europe, Music Messe Frankfurt in late April to present the new Cubase. So I think the Frankfurt show hasn't been as relevant for, I don't think Yamaha or Steinberg is exhibited at the Frankfurt show. So it's not the glory of a show that it used to be. Okay. So I don't think the announcement would be contingent upon the Frankfurt show. All right, so I hope with Cubase 12 we don't need iLok. I hate iLok, so we're not using iLok, so it's a new identity system, and you could actually kind of check it out and play around with it if you get Dorco 4 SE. So you could, create your My Steinberg account and actually experience the new licensing system. And that's a free version of Dorco. So, and you can see how the new licensing system works, but it's not iLok based. Okay, so I just see question. The Groove Agent is not playing the pattern where it should be getting fills. Where it should, getting fills where I don't want them. It's like it's stuck to a certain position. I have to render and cut everything after, lots of pops. So as we're doing this, let me just do some of my creative tempo mapping here. All right, so let's say, so I'm not sure if as you're doing this, how you're triggering the fills. So let's say if I have my pattern here, there's different ways of doing this. So let's say, and it could be that, so let's say I want to drag this particular pattern to my timeline. So, and I want it to have it go directly to that. Let's do a fill and then back. So now when I play this, we'll have our pattern. It'll jump to a different pattern here, like a variation with rides, if I remember. And I'll take it off cycle. Sorry about that. All right. So now we'll go to the rides. Now after this, it's going to do a fill, then back to the first pattern. So I'm not sure if you're triggering it by dragging the pads or if you're playing the patterns, if you're kind of sequencing individual MIDI notes to trigger these patterns here. And if you do that, try on the pattern mode just to click on Omni, or you click on this little icon right here, and that could give a unique pattern or unique MIDI port to the patterns. So try that. But if you could let us know how you're getting the fills. Also make sure that when you do this that you don't have follow transport turned on, because it could still be playing. If you have it playing and synchronizing to itself, you may have, so let's say if I go here, it could be playing kind of two patterns at once. It could play back the pattern that's going on in a live sequencer. So if you do this, make sure that you have follow transport, deactivate it, and stop, and then it won't play. But if I hit play now, it's just going to play back the pattern. So if you could let us know exactly how you're playing and triggering the patterns, that would be helpful. So if you drag it in or you're just playing it from a single MIDI note. Okay, just Okay, so we see Rich asking a question. Just came back to Cubase. Could you explain MIDI merge and why I'm always getting the glue tool to get rid of diagonal lines? Thanks. So if we have, all right, so let's just kind of blow this part up so we can see it a little better. All right, so let's say when we see diagonal lines, that means that there's two events that are kind of on top of each other. Okay, so, and it could be that we, as we look at this, we could just, pick and choose which one will be the active part. So that means when we see those diagonal lines that there's two events that are stacked. So as we do this, now if I wanted to merge those two events, all I'd have to do is to come over here and let's say grab the glue gun, and I think it's a hold down Alt or Option and then click, and now that will be one part with all of the parts kind of stacked. Now, some people will inadvertently get into merge mode by their MIDI record mode settings. So you may, if you're doing this, you may want to have it create new parts, I believe, or it may be set to merge, and maybe you don't want it to be in merge, like as you record a part on top of an existing part. So, if you wanted it to merge directly in, try just going to the MIDI record mode here. And at that point, just, set this to merge, and then you may not have to do the merge, and you won't see parts that will be kind of stacked with the diagonal lines on top of them, so on top of each other. Okay, so I just got an email just about the probably the GPIO question. So let's see if I can read through it real quick. Okay, so I want to have some output from my computer. It doesn't matter how to make a trigger of something. I think this is with the record light. I want to tell you various examples, and after that, a little more of the final need. Let's see if this is something I should probably do offline. All right, so it's kind of, I'll respond to this offline. Okay, so I'll respond to that. And if we have time towards the end, we can see if we get to it. But thanks for sending the email. All right, so we have Razel checking in from Denmark. Thanks for joining it. And we have Charles K joining from the UK. All right, so we see Jeff Sabelski said the scrolling trick for the project window works for him. All right, so we have a question from Jeff Pearson. How do I implement an external synth as a slave to hear sounds from MIDI tracks in Cubase played on my Roland Phantom 6? So, many times people will combine the outputs of their synthesizer into the mixer where their audio interface is. But what you can do, because, is if your audio interface has additional inputs that you're not using, if you go to the audio connections, and we could go to external instruments. But if we wanted to now click on add external instrument, we could do this, and let's say, okay, it's going to be a Phantom 6. So, and what we want to do is to tell which inputs of your audio interface it's connected. And if I do this as, so if we just click here, so we say, okay, this is going to be, it's going into inputs 3 and 4 of my audio interface. And then at that point, we could just come over here. Let's add an instrument track, and we would see external instrument plugins. And we can say, okay, I want this to go to, you know, whatever that we have. So let's say, okay, I want it to go to my Phantom or Montage. And now at this point, the when we play MIDI to it, the MIDI would go out to the out to your Phantom. The Phantom generates a sound. The output of the Phantom, so you take the audio outputs from the Phantom, connect it to the inputs, and then at that point, we could monitor it back, and all the latency will be compensated for. So you could do it like that. If your audio interface doesn't have additional inputs or outputs, you'll need to combine it in a mixer, because there's no way for the audio to transmit from the Phantom into Cubase otherwise. And that's why a lot of people use virtual instruments. All right, so we see Jazz Dude's been doing some moderation for us. Thank you for that. All right, so we see John Tobin is like, hi, Greg, been a while. Just to let you know, got VST up and running. It's awesome, so that's great. Thanks for letting us know. Okay, so we see a question for Jess Sabelsky. Greg, in Nuendo, if many tracks are filled, range selection activated, most tracks are muted. Then on exporting video, for instance, will muted tracks still affect the file size of the export? Thank you. So the file size of the export is really, you know, everything's going to be mixed down to, you know, a stereo file for the audio export. So muted tracks, unmuted tracks don't really factor into the size of the video file. So the video is going to take a lot of, you know, the file size itself is just going to be for the video, and the audio itself will be kind of just playing back a stereo audio file. So it's not playing back a multi-track. So if you have events that are muted or unmuted, it's not going to make a difference in the file size, because it's just going to render like a stereo mix down of the file into the video itself. All right, so just see a question. Is it possible to select multiple clip gain points after drawing them and then deciding to, for example, nudge them? Okay, so let me just open up a different project, see if I understand. Okay, so if we wanted to do, all right, so if we wanted to, so I'm not sure if it's with kind of the, you know, if we wanted to take, let's say if I select multiple events here, that we could adjust kind of our clip gains. All right, so let's say if I wanted to do this, so select multiple clip gain points after drawing them and then deciding to nudge them. So if it's going to be like so we could do this with the clip point handle. But if it's going to be like event gain that's been drawn in, like this. So I think that that's kind of more of a free. So let's. So, you know, we could, I don't think that we could select multiple of those particular points as just going to be on the particular file. And a lot of times people use this just as a quick correction for, you know, debreathing stuff. So, but there isn't a way to kind of have those, and, you know, but you could do it if you wanted to have it for, if you go to automation. Let me see if it makes any difference if I activate the project here. So yeah, those aren't necessarily, you know, it's just kind of tied directly to the events. But if you wanted to work that way, you could do it, you know, with automation. So if we wanted to now select, you know, the automation and be able to nudge it up and down or left and right if we wanted to. So you could do stuff like that, but not with the kind of the drawn in clip gain. Okay, so I just see a question. Will there be an update to Wavelab Pro to take multi-MIDI wave format from Reason Rack MIDI data in regular Cubase Pro? Also, who do you change the MIDI data in the Reason Rack for Cubase? So I'm not sure what the multi-MIDI wave format is, but, you know, Wavelab will support, you know, like 22.2 channel files, so I'm not that familiar with Reason. I don't have a license of it, and maybe you could check with the guys at Propeller Heads, Kevin. And see, how do you change the MIDI data in the Reason Rack for Cubase? So again, I don't have a copy of Reason, but, you know, I think it now runs as a VST instrument, so you should be able to just come over here, add an instrument track, and see Reason show up and have the MIDI data that's inside of Cubase, you know, be sent directly out to Reason. So any virtual instrument here that you have set up, that should be able to be sent to Reason. So, but again, I don't have a license of it to know how it works. If they send one, I'll be able to answer it, but. Okay, so we have a question from Jess Sabelski. Is it okay to plug Nuendo Cubase when publishing YouTube videos in the video description? Sure. I think there might be some limitations, like if you use like an official Steinberg logo or something like that, but you could always say, you know, create it in Nuendo and Cubase. We'd appreciate it. And thanks for asking. It's very kind. All right, so it says, question, you showed that if I hold down the mouse down in a project window that I can move left and right and up and down in a project. This is not working for me. Is that a Mac only feature? I believe that's works on Mac and PC. So here I could just do that. I don't have my PC on currently to test, but it could be also be contingent upon the mouse. So again, I'm just, you know, pressing the middle, like the mouse scroll wheel button down, and then holding it down while I move. So I could kind of navigate in the project window like that. So again, I could just come here and just move. So that's another way of doing it. I don't think that's Mac only. But if you're, maybe if the, you know, mouse isn't capable of doing that, I just have kind of a generic totally generic mouse I could switch between 3 computers on. So it's not a specific Apple mouse or anything, and I didn't set it up in preferences. So maybe if someone else could check as well. All right, so we have a question from Benny in Sweden. When I load a MIDI file in MediaBay, it takes a long time before I can use and hear the sound. But when I load an audio file, it goes fast. What can it be due to? Because a lot of people, don't realize that when you have a MIDI file, that the MIDI file is just like note data. And then as you do that, if you're playing MIDI loops, it then loads up the instrument. And that instrument may have samples. Whereas audio, you just kind of hit play and it's doing that. So that delay is, finding the MIDI, finding the instrument to play back the sound that the MIDI loop was created in, and loading up the samples within that instrument. So that's why it takes a little longer than audio. Okay, so Michael Pierce says 110 watching, slap the like button. All right. Okay, so another question from Jeff Sabelski. Greg, maybe another simple trick I'm missing. So when I select everything in the project window, which includes the loop field, I want to move everything, including the loop position, on the timeline. Okay, so let's say I'll come here and I just want to move everything in the loop position. So let's say I'll come here. So you could just, if we have like your range selection tool. So I could just, come here with the range selection, and I'm going to hold down Control and Shift, I think, and this will be kind of global. So if I have that, I can now just, with my range selection, I could, just choose to, move. So again, Control plus Shift, and use the range selection tool around the whole components. And then I can move all the contents with all the automation just by moving the selected range. Now, if you wanted to also, let's say, I'll disable the divide track list feature here. But if we have a marker track, and let's say I have like a cycle marker, one other way of doing this is just by grabbing like the range selection tool and double clicking between locators. And then you could, but just, hold down like Control and Shift while you select the range, and then you could globally select the range like so, and you'll see it snap to the event, and then you see the little turns into a hand, and then you could just move the range like so. Okay, just all right. So we see Graham Witcher just saying how fantastic it is to hear Hot Mess on the live stream. In case you guys have not heard this wonderful band, go check it out on YouTube. Voodoo Leche and the Dark Emerald Book of Ishtar. I wish I could be as creative to come up with that name like Michael Teams. Jealous of that. All right, just reading through. All right, so I just see a question. Hey, Greg, is there an AU version of Groove Agent SE? I would. So I believe so. So let's see if we go to the. Let's see if I still had it open. But I think if you have the license for it, that you could run the standalone Groove Agent SE. Let's see if we could find it real quick here. But I know that the full version of Groove Agent is AU. Let's see if there's let's just see if it's, we download it real quick if it's indicated. But you know, the SE version is what comes with Cubase, so it may not need to have an AU version, but I know that the full one does. We'll see if we can come back to it. Or let me just see if we could Google it real quick. So Groove Agent SE5 now provides AAX and AU support. So yes, but you may need the license to do that. Okay, so we see JVI's figured out you have to hold down the scroll wheel, not mouse click, and wow, revelation of the day. We see Jeff Sabelski still likes the groove of Kerosene on the Hot Mess CD, so that was a fun one to play. See, Michael Pierce doesn't like G flat, so you can change the enharmonic spelling. So we just see, hey, cool chord progression, guys. What about Cubase 12? So Cubase 12, I'm sure will be coming out, and we'll show you all the new features as soon as it's available and available for people to use. So. All right, so you see Michael Teams just says, yes, I need that. My revelation of the day. Thanks, Greg. You are Yoda. So thank you, Michael. It's very kind. Okay, so we have a question. Chords. How can I prevent hearing and recording the actual note I play on the keyboard, which doesn't fit? Watching the triggered chord, in addition, the chord triggered by that note. Okay, so let's come over here to project. Let me see if I understand the question. Okay, so if we have the chord pads here, you know, we could trigger to activate the project. Okay, so, you know, with the chord pads, I think, let's say if I, all right, let me adjust my octaves here on my keyboard controller. All right, so if I have the chord pads here, just kind of reread this one more time. How can I prevent hearing and recording the actual note I play on a keyboard, which doesn't fit watching the triggered chord in addition to the chord triggered by that note? So try making sure that you set the MIDI input here to chord pads instead. So now I don't hear the particular note unless I'm out of range. So if I come here, but any chord that's been defined, so just try, you know, when you come over here to make sure that you only have like that particular track record enabled and that the MIDI input is not set to all MIDI inputs, but to chord pads specifically. So let me know if that makes sense. So we see from Jeff Zabelski, Vivaldi used patterns for sure. So all the greats did. All right, so we have Captenergy Music checking in from Pennsylvania. Thanks for joining today. All right, and he just says, Greg, thanks for everything you do. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. It's a joy to be able to help people and share knowledge on Cubase twice a week like this. All right, so we see from John Costigan, thanks so much, Greg. Fascinating tutorial on the chord patterns and construction. Your suggestions will be a great help in soloing as well. So yeah, sometimes, you know, you watch like great jazz guitar players, you're like, oh, such interesting chord patterns that they're doing, and they're holding the same chord shape and just kind of moving up and down the neck. And it's like, oh, it's not like necessarily tied to a particular scale. It's just, you know, that's the finger position that they're playing. Same with piano. So. All right, so we have Florida Cubase Pro 10.5 checking in. Is it Renado Productions? Thanks for joining today. All right. Okay, so we see, so question, is it possible to record drums just by clicking the drums with my mouse? Okay, so here's a good tip. So let's say if I want it to come here and I have a Groove Agent kit and I want it to click on the drum pads here. And let's, all right, let me adjust the pan here of that. All right, so let's say if I wanted to, so a lot of times people come over here and they'll hit record and then they hit the pads. And let's say I'll just come here, they hit record and then they hit the pads and then they stop and then it disappears because no MIDI information was recorded. If we set our MIDI input port to the instrument itself, now when I hit record, now it's recorded it as data. So what you have to do is to tell the track that you're recording to record the MIDI output from that instance of Groove Agent as the MIDI input port, and then you could record just by clicking on the pads. That's a secret trick, so don't tell anyone. Okay, so we have a question. Hi from Germany. Groove Agent makes different time signatures within the recording track when recording MIDI and using autofills. Why? Thank you. Okay, so it could really depend. So Groove Agent within the recording track when recording MIDI and using autofills. So, you know, I think that you could have different patterns, you know, like in this particular one, in this particular kit here, let's just close this and let's open up this kit. So when we come over here to this pattern, you know, so generally, let's see if there's any indication of, all right, so when we load these patterns up, so I'm not sure if, you know, when we look at this, you know, and we go to styles, you know, it could be, you know, generally when you load up a style for a kit, it will do that. But I guess if you wanted to switch a fill pattern to 3/4, you know, I could come here. That it could play back, you know, each pattern pad could have its own independent meter if needed. So maybe it's something like that where, okay, I wanted to come to a 6/8 pattern and now I'm in 4/4. And now I'm in 6/8. But generally, once you load up a kit with all of its patterns consolidated, that it should automatically be the same meter. So I'm not sure if the project itself is switching meters. But usually the auto fills, and so, you know, like while we do this, so let's say if I'm directly here, and let's say, and you mentioned the autofill, so I'll just, and if you could let me know if there's a particular pattern, so let's say if I come here and I'm in the pattern editor, and I just have the autofill set to like every 2 measures. So that seems to play the patterns kind of on the beat. But if there's a particular agent where it's not making sense for that, just feel free to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, or if you wanted to just mention it in the chat, you could work with that. Let's see, question. Who's the most famous person you have worked with? So I have helped Paul McCartney. He's pretty famous, I think. Stevie Wonder, done a lot of stuff with him over the time. I'm lucky to call Peter Frampton a friend. I've helped Zed. I've helped composers like Hans Zimmer. So all sorts of different people, and, you know, I've recorded Eric Clapton, on festivals and stuff. All right, so we have a question. Can you show a little more of what Apache SX can do, please? All right. Let's see if I still have a particular project. All right, well, I'll just do a new one. All right, so I thought I had a project where we could work on that. So let's start. Just do new project. All right, and let's just. All right, so. All right, adjust my keyboard range here. Okay, so now we'll come over here to like the Apache. So it's SX. So this is going to be a little more involved. So let's say, okay, I just want it to. All right, so let's say let's do eighth notes. All right, and so there's going to be different directions, so if we wanted to, there's going to be more directions. So so at this point, you could also just say, if you wanted to set your pitch range. But I think the fun part gets to when we actually come over here and say, okay, we want it to, you could sort by any, or you could put it into like, arpeggiator style. So let's say now I want this to be set to eighth notes and my length to eighth notes. So but I think if we wanted to now, when we go to our sequence, that we could just come over here and say, let me find a MIDI loop. Okay, so say I have this part in, and now that we could drag and drop that MIDI sequence. So now if I just want to take the I could come over here and say, okay, I just want to take stop that. So we could just kind of find see if I can find something that's a little more. But any just different pattern that we could just drop the sequence and be able to kind of play. And just have, you know, the length set from the sequence or from, you know, particular, you know, PPQ values or different rhythmic values there. So, you know, play around. I had a file that was really, had a nice little string arpeggiator part, but, you know, just being able to just drag and drop any kind of MIDI part over into it, you know, that you could just kind of just drag directly there and say, okay, now that I'm playing this, and I'll just stop that from looping. I could just take that in. And come up with different ideas. So even if you have like a little bit of a sketch, you could play something and then just drag and drop that right into Apache SX. All right, thanks for all the great questions. Yeah, we're doing on time, so we're doing pretty well. Okay, Greg, so we have a question for Jeff Sabelsky. The quickest, easiest procedure to use a track's WAV file selection to activate and use the sample track with an attached MIDI keyboard. Dragging file onto the sample track isn't working. Thanks. So if you're not, I forget, sometimes the sample track, you know, it might be that the, it could be like maybe a sample rate conversion, but you could also, I think if we just have an audio file, let's say in the project window here, so that we could, I think if you go to media, you could also try this and create sampler track from that. So you could try that from the media menu to just select create sampler track from that particular event. But check to see if it's like a different sample rate or maybe like a really high sample rate or something like that. And that could also trigger something like that. I seem to remember something that could cause that, but you know, try going to the media menu. Okay, so we have a question. How can I apply fixed length and velocity to MIDI tracks? Okay, so let's say if I wanted to come here. All right, so I'll just do just a quick arpeggiator here. Okay, and I'll just go and record. All right, so let's say, like here I may have, we'll look at our MIDI part. So let's say we have different velocity values. Here we'll have similar lengths. So, you know, if I wanted to fix the velocity on all of it, you know, one of the things you could do is you could select all the notes. And then where you see velocity, now I want these all to be 100. So let's say if I select all these and go to 100, and I think if I hold down Shift or a modifier key, try Control. So if I hold down Control, we could do that. And then you could also choose to quantize ends of events. If you go to, so let's say I want these all to be half note long. I could come over here, say, okay, let's make these 1/2 note, and come over here to advanced quantize and quantize MIDI lengths, just like that. And now all the notes, and you could also do this within the project or within the logical editor. So here you could, then there'd be presets for fixed velocity. So you can say fixed velocity of 100, or let's make it, you know, 80, and then hit apply. And you could also say, you know, type is equal to note, and we want to take the length of the note and set to a fixed value of, you know, 1 beat. And you could do stuff like that using the logical editor. So a couple different ways to do that. Okay, so you see when cutting a MIDI track, even if it's quantized to 1/4, it cuts the first chord. How can I prevent that? So a lot of times, you know, you want to, you know, there's a good possibility that your event, you know, if we do this, like your event, your first note may be slightly ahead of the beat. So even though it looks like, you know, if I come here and cut, you know, and it's like ever so slightly when I cut this, you know, because the beginning of the event is in, you know, but one of the preferences that you could check out is, again, if you go to editing to MIDI to split MIDI events, at that point it will, when you cut the event there, it will split the notes so that those notes are starting right on time. Or you could just simply quantize the start of those notes. All right, we have a question. Hey, Greg, is there a preference to auto-copy video files into the project folder in Cubase? If not, does Nuendo have that feature? So I think let's come over here and say we'll import a video file. into this project. Okay, so all right, so I believe if we look at the location of that video file in the pool, so we go media to pool window. So we see this, and it's going to be in that particular folder where I import it from. So it's going to be in my export video. So let's see if I come here, right click, and let's do a prepare archive. And it says, do you want to copy video files too? Say okay. Pool is ready for archive. So now that file has automatically been copied over. So come here and just do a prepare archive, and that could move the video file that's in a different folder into the project folder. So let me see if it's still in my video folder, but that'd be all you have to do. So just in the pool, just right click and click on prepare archive, and you can do that in Cubase, or if you want to upgrade to Nuendo to do that as well, you know, I'm sure Steinberg will take your money. All right, so we see Michael Pierce is having to check out a little early. So thanks for joining us today. Okay, just reading through comments. Thanks for all the great discussions. All right, we see Jarlath Quinn is back, so thanks. He's just here absorbing information, so thanks for joining us and saying hi. Okay, so we have a question. Hey, Greg, is there a way to quickly revert audio events back to their original form after making changes with Vari Audio? Sometimes the audio event sounds a bit grainy when Vari Audio is in bypass. So if we've done a number of Vari Audio edits, okay, so let's say if I okay, so if you come over here to, so let's say I've done like all sorts of edits here, and I want to jump back to where I was. I think you could say reset pitch changes for selection. So you could just come right over here, reset all changes for selection. So if you come, let's say now, if I wanted to come here and I could just reset all changes, and that will take you right back. So go to the functions menu within the Vari Audio tab of the inspector, and you could say reset all changes after changes have been done. All right, so Mark Raymond is saying it's time for all to click the like button with passion. So Okay, so we see a question from Brian Sawyer. Says, my metronome will not sound except using general MIDI in which it plays a piano. Not enough to drive one. It plays a piano, not, or note, probably. Enough to drive one crazy. I'm using control room, but I don't think that should matter. So probably, Brian, what happened is you come over here, if you go to the metronome setup, you may have, when you go to click sounds, you may have it set to the MIDI output port here. So check to, we could just set that to not connected, and then make sure that we have, the Steinberg click sound activated here. So it's probably just generating the MIDI output. So at that point, or it could be on this, if you go to general, you may have unchecked use audio click, and then you may have it set to use, if that's unchecked, it may send a use MIDI click to like your Microsoft GS wavetable onboard sound synth. So not only will it probably sound bad, but it will be out of time and delayed. So just make sure when you go to your transport menu, go to your metronome setup, that you have use audio click is set there, and that's probably what's turned off. Okay, so we see John Costigan and Michael Teams want people to whack the like button with impassioned pleas. So we see a question, can external instruments be included in real-time mixdowns? Yes, they can be. So obviously it would have to be in real time, but you could do a render in place to external instruments, and once they're rendered and they're configured, they would be included in the real-time mixdown. Okay, so you just see love and appreciate the timestamps in the comments. However, if they were put in the description, they would create links on the time ruler, which would be even more convenient. Yeah, I looked into it, and there's only so many that you could do with that, like so many chapters in the YouTube video. Otherwise, we don't have enough space to put all the questions that are covered in the live stream with some of the information that Steinberg needs for that to work as chapters. So I understand what you mean, but yeah, YouTube, I haven't checked it in the last 6 months or so, but there wasn't enough space to do that, because we have, often 100 questions. So maybe YouTube has changed that, and I'll take a look at it and revisit that. But thanks for the comment. All right, so we just see a question. How can I mute monitor's output when recording? Unless click possible. I want to use headphones only to avoid feedback. So it could really depend on, if your audio interface can, if you have like a 2-in, 2-out interface, which is very popular, then, it could depend on the, if the headphone output can be decoupled from the main outputs. A lot of audio interfaces will send the same signal out of the main outputs 1 and 2 to the headphone output. Sometimes just turning down the output monitor volume can solve that, and then you just hear it in the headphones. If you have more than 2 if you have more than 2 stereo outputs, you could often route the headphones to additional to mimic outputs 3 and 4. And then if you go to your control room, you could set up like a dedicated monitor setup and say, okay, my outputs on a control room, when I could switch from speakers to headphones there. But it really is critical if your audio interface can decouple the headphone output from the outputs 1 and 2. Okay, so we have a question from Jeff Sabelski. Said, Greg, I have Wavelab Pro 10 and Nuendo 11. So will Wavelab Pro 11 have features that Nuendo 12 won't? Thanks. So, yeah, I would say that Cubase and Nuendo are kind of built and designed from the same code base. So now we'll have Nuendo with all the Cubase features with more capabilities like for game and post-production and Atmos mixing. So we have that kind of already set up. But, there will be, and Wavelab is kind of a different family of programs. So, there will be stuff you could do in Wavelab that you can't do in Nuendo and vice versa. So. Okay, so we have a question from FJ Segovia, and I believe he's in Madrid, in España. So it says, I have a track with Groove Agent with 4 different sounds. How I get different track for each sound? Thank you very much. Okay, so let's come over here, and I probably destroyed this enough. And it depends if there's 2 different ways of doing this. If you're using kind of an acoustic agent or a beat agent. So we'll show both. Okay, so if I have let's say an acoustic agent, when I go to open it up, so I'll play back this pattern. All right. All right, so now everything is kind of being sent to one stereo output. And we have 32 stereo outs in Groove Agent. So let's say I want my snare, and we see in the acoustic agent, when we go to mixer, so I can say, okay, I want my kick to go out of my main mix. I want snare to go out of output 2, and my hi-hat out of output 3. So I could now see my hi-hats, and let's say my snare is out of my room mic is in output 4. So now we could have these outputs being bussed directly, there's different drum sounds being bussed to different outputs. If we wanted to do the same on a beat agent kit, so now when I go to a beat agent kit, it would be similar, but we would just take the outputs. Have to fix that. And when I select the pad, here's where we could send it to our different outputs here. So we would go just send this on, see our main, and let's say I want this snare to go on output 2. So as I do this and add the outputs, they're automatically added to the mixer. So you could just kind of click here. And if I want this sound to go out of output 3, I could just kind of and at this point, So that's how you could bust the different outputs out from Groove Agent. All right, so we see Sable Winters on the live stream. So thanks for joining us today. We missed having you on the Zoom meetup. Wonderful discussion as always. All right, so just see Greg's question for Jeff Sabelski. Greg, doing a recording project for Composer with my oboe with time signature. I couldn't copy and paste segments of his time. Different measure every measure 3 4 2 4 5 8 etc. Each measure. How can I repeat? So I think we could use the range tool for this. So let's go ahead and I think I may have his signature track. Okay, so let's say I have 4 4 3 4 2 4 and let's say a 5 8. Okay, so we're good. Just gonna make this bigger, and I will select kind of this range like so, and I'm just hitting Control or Command D to duplicate, and then so you could just kind of duplicate just like that. So use the range selection tool. Let's see if I use the tools here, and then if I want to, and even if I just select the events to delete, I could do that. But if you select the range, then that will kind of automatically delete the events. So let's say, okay, I want to take that much of the range and just duplicate events. So Control or Command D, and that should do it for you. Okay. All right. So we see a question. How come that I can align some vocal audio tracks, but some I can't? Does it have to do with me cutting the audio tracks previously? So it can. So a lot of times if we do stuff like that, I'll just open up a project that has some alignment. So let's say if I wanted to, you know, I've done all sorts of edits and slipping audio within this particular section. All right, so let's say, and I move this part over. Just take my snap off. So let's say, all right, so I have this. So let's say I want to open the alignment panel and I want that as my reference. And let's see if I do this as targets. That works. All right, so it could be, you know, what you may want to do is once you do that is come here and create you duplicate the version and then maybe render the file. So when we come over here, we could just say audio to bounce selection. And then maybe do the alignment. So let's say if I come here, this will be our target. My son is home. And then that will align. So you could try that. And then your original file will still be here in the track version. So sometimes, yeah, so give that a try and see. All right, so we see question. Hello. Is there a way to see what questions have been answered on these live streams? So every live stream has an index that's pinned to the top. So once we have, so you could search there, but there's also a website called cubaseindex.com that Jan has where you could search through over 15,000 questions that we've done. So, but look on the comments field pinned to the top. You'll see timestamps with all the topics covered. All right, so we see Robbie Bowling's able to join us today. Thanks for being there. And Robbie's based outside of Dallas, Texas. So glad you can make it. See JVI just saying, hey, Greg, need to look at that Apache SX. Looks like fun. So all sorts of good stuff, especially we don't play keyboards well like myself. All right, so we just see a question. What is the most important new feature needed for Cubase 12? So many people think it's the licensing. So many people that wouldn't have checked out Cubase 12 because of the USB-E licenser will now be able to experience it. So, but we know some people like the USB-E licenser, but we'll have to see what the most important feature is once we're able to kind of show it to everyone. All right, so we see that Gareth and Pablo are working on projects. So sorry that they're not able to join us live, but wish them well for us, Michael. So we see from Jazz Dude, I wish F1 shouldn't be locked to help via internets, but a lower window on-off switch. So yeah, there's some keys, I think we discussed it before that, are just kind of fixed. And if you want to have a Windows logo on your box or your software, you need to follow those conventions. So we see a question, will the dongle stop working eventually? So the versions that support the dongle will forever work on that dongle, but eventually those versions may not work on Windows 23 or whatever Mac OS version is out at that time. But those versions, as long as the your computer runs and the e-licenser is available, will those are perpetual licenses, so they won't go away. So okay, so we just see, hello, Greg, and thanks for all the time you give us. A small question: how to make a render on place? I guess it's a render in place of Groove Agent with one track per instrument: kick, snare, hi hat, toms. Okay, so let's just jump back. So if we send each of those sources to different outputs, then when we do a render in place, so let's see if we're here. So I'm going to okay, so from our previous example, let's say like I have my snare going out of output, my hi-hats, and my rooms, and let's say my room and overheads. So let's say these are all going to different outputs now. So when I have this event on my project window, so if I did everything correctly, I'm just going to select the track and I will go to edit and we'll do a render in place. So I'll just select the event here. Okay, and I'll choose, come right over here. So we'll say we can mute the source events, but I'll just render it. So now we'll have our top track will be kicks, snare, and our room mics. So all you have to do is send it to different outputs and then just do a render in place and it'll all be rendered to individual tracks. Just see comment from Graham Witcher. I still believe we should have a choice though. Go to the new licensing system. Yes, however, keep the option open for those of us who wish to keep using the dongle. So, the new versions, in the current versions and before, there's lots of underlying code that's tied to the dongles to verify licenses. So that's why it's going to be, they can't transition that and have it work with the new system. So that's why it's going to be switching to the new system, but the new system doesn't affect the previous versions. All right. So I just see a comment. The new licensing system doesn't require to be online all the time, but you have to refresh the activation every X months or so. So you won't have to refresh the activation. So Steinberg changed the policy on that due to customer feedback. All right, I'm going to go to some of the questions that were sent in so we don't miss those. Bear with me for a second. Okay, so you see a question, Greg, I made a custom collection of most used plugins organized by category on the right below. I would like to be able to alphabetize the categories by a button or push or manually. Is there a way? Okay, so let's come over here to our VST plugin manager. And let's say if I want to come over here. So, it could depend how you actually kind of create this. So let's say I'll do a new one and I'll copy, let's say my current collection. So let's say I'll just do VST effects. I have more of those. So I'll click on the plus and we will copy the current collection. So if I do this in categories, we can see that, there isn't necessarily a way to resort it. We could sort it by, like when we go to look at it, we could sort it, by category or by, or by folder that you want, by company. But there isn't a way to automatically kind of sort it by alphabet. But I'll pass that along as a feature suggestion. So, when you want to do this, we could, do that, but there isn't a way to alphabetize. So you may have to do that manually, which if you have a lot of plugins is not the most fun thing to do. Okay, so I think we covered the next, the question is next. Okay, we had a question. I'm in the process of creating a small sample library from a recording session last week. I'm going to need to chop up a large 3-hour region into lots of tiny regions, sampler between 2 to 8 seconds long. When I'm done editing, what is the best way to export all these regions as their own WAV files? All right, so there's one way to do this that's pretty slick. So let's say if we have a long-ish file, and I'll just drop something in here. So we'll come over here. Okay, so let's say I have a long file here. Okay, so if I'm in the sample editor, I could come over here and let's say there's a little function if we go to the setup menu where you can see regions. So I could come over here, and once I have that open, so each of my edits, I could just come over here and add a region. We could give it a name. I could come over here. Let's say, okay, this is my new region. I want that part, so you can kind of go through like the whole sample section. So we could just come here, add regions like so. All right, so when we go to okay, so we added, let's say, 4,000 regions, whatever. So we still have the original file intact. Now, when we go to the pool window, when we add regions to an audio file, we'll see this little plus sign just to the left of it. And that indicates that these are our particular regions that we've defined. Now, these regions will play back from a segment from the original file. But if I wanted to turn these into separate, distinct audio files, all I'd have to do is to select the regions. And if I hold down, let's say the shift key here, and then if we come to audio and choose bounce selection, at that point we could choose a new folder. I'll say this is our bounced files, and hit open. And now all of the files will now be in the bounced files folder that we've defined right there as new and separate audio files. So go into the sample editor, click here to add the regions, and then as you define the regions, go to the pool and select the regions. Right click, go to audio to bounce selection and defined a folder, and all of the files will be placed into that particular region. All right, so we had a question. It's from Alexander from Moscow. Can you please explain the work in the score editor? I'm not professional at this point. I find that the notes in PDF and try to add them to the score editor. How can I add these symbols? And what he had highlighted was like slurs. So let's go ahead and take a look. So let's say if I wanted to come over here to where Jeff Sabelsky will come over and look at our oboe part. So let's say if I wanted to put a slur on particular notes here, let me just switch this. I think we should have our notes down to 30-second notes for a Schubert piece. Okay, so if I wanted to just slur particular notes here, what I could do is I'm just going to select the notes, and at this point we could go to your scores menu and you'll see insert slur, and then that will add the slur, and then we could change kind of the arc of the slur. And so all you have to do is kind of just select the particular phrase with the notes with the cursor, go to the scores menu and select insert slur. And then you could change kind of the slur as needed, just like that. Okay, so we have a question. I have a project with about 27 tracks and some plugins. I was preparing to do vocal overdub and there was too much latency. I clicked on constrained delay compensation, and now the tracks were slightly out of sync. I deactivated many of the tracks as I could and put all tracks into musical mode. No help. I changed the buffer size to 32. No help. Do you have any idea what the problem is? So this sounds like sometimes I think just from Ronnie Light, some of the different scenarios may show up where it could be a plugin that's not reporting the correct latency. So if you have a project, so let's jump to this project. And one of the things that you could do to determine like where the latency is actually on your project. So let's say if I have, different plugins that are causing latency. So let's say, okay, I have like a multi-band compressor, and let's say I have two multi-band compressors. Okay. All right, and I'll come here. Let's do a convolution reverb. And I wanted to have a cloner plugin. So, I think that you're going to have something that's, causing the particular latency. So let's say, and how you could determine which plugins are causing latency is when you come over here to we go to our main mixer. So we'll come over here. And as we work on this, you'll see a little option that we could add from the setup window here, where we could add channel latency. And you can just kind of look directly here and see those particular effects. Now, generally activating the channel, the constrained delay compensation will bypass those latent plugins. Switching to musical mode shouldn't really make, and lowering your buffer size, that doesn't change so much if I think you're going to have one plugin, but look, on all of your mixer channels. And, like when you do a constrained delay compensation, you may have a plugin on the input channel, or you may have a plugin that's sitting on the control room, like Sonar Works, or like a room correction plugin that causes a lot of latency. So just make sure that you do this and look for that. And there could be something on the particular audio interface that's causing latency. It says latency could be added by the buffer size and by any plugins. So sometimes people will, it's like, oh, I got an audio interface that has some plugins. I'll put those on the input channel, and those plugins could be causing latency. And some will actually allow you to run, like the effects on DSP, like the Steinberg UR series. So use the channel latency mode, and again, just come here to the setup, and then find. And you could actually, once you come here, you could click in the channel set, and it'll show you which plugins are causing the latency on that particular track. So you could be aware that, oh, this plugin could cause problems in tracking, only use it for mixing. All right, so we had a question. Can you please advise me whether purchasing an 8-core CPU would be significantly better than a 4-core CPU? So, if your 8-core CPU is running at, 1.6 gigahertz and you have a 4-core CPU that's running at 5 gigahertz, the 4-core may be better. So generally, the more cores is better, but what could be more important is the processing speed per core. So, people will say, oh, should I go for processing speed or for number of cores? And, the ideal answer is both. But, if you had to really pick one, I would, make sure that you have the fastest, clock speed per processor, and, and then get as many cores of that as you possibly can. All right, so I think we had some other questions from Friday's live stream that we didn't get to because it was a shorter live stream because of the Zoom meetup. Okay, so and I think this is from a previous live stream where someone had like a MIDI track. And I think I misunderstood the question. I apologize for that. So sometimes when I do the indexes, like, oh, I just totally botched that. Now I understand the question. So let's say I have these 2 notes. All right, and I'll come over here and let's select. Okay, my IAC driver is going to cause problems. All right. Okay, so now let's say we'll save this as okay, and I wanted to import these. So the question was, taking external MIDI tracks, and person was having problem importing them as from the import tracks from project function. So let's come over here. We'll do a new project and see if I have any issues here. And before we do that, I'll actually send it to a particular. I'm going to route these to a different MIDI output port so we can make sure that that is carried over. So I'm going to route this to my UR24C. Okay, so we'll just take a quick look at these 2 parts. Okay. All right, so now what I want to do is just import tracks from selected projects, or import tracks from project. So that looks like it worked fine for me. Retained the channels, the notes, the MIDI ports. So that seems like it's kind of working as expected. All right. All right. So another question we had is how to have the automated parameter lane show up in a project window after writing automation. Okay. So let's say I have an audio track here. And I have kind of, I want it to come to a plugin. So let's say I want it to come directly to the limiter. Let's do something a little more interesting. Okay, so let's say I come to my squasher plugin. Okay, so now there's so what the question was, they wanted to be able to take this particular parameter and as it's automated to have that pop up as an automation lane. So we could do this in the automation panel. So when we go over here to settings, there's a little function for reveal parameter on write. So as soon as let's say I play this and I automate the plugin, I'm going to come right over here. So as soon as I touch a parameter, that automation lane shows up automatically right there for you. So to get the automation to show up, all you have to do is, again, if you hit F6 or go to the automation panel right there and go to settings and activate reveal parameter on write. Okay, so question. I've had my project open a while. My mobile desktop, laptop fan has been going. So I look to see what's running. Usually this project has Cubase using about 8 to 10 gigabytes of RAM. Now it's only 283 megabytes, but the CPU is 39%. How is that happening? Okay, so, sometimes what you want to do with this, so if it's like with a laptop and if you're on Windows, if you come over here to the studio setup and go to the audio system, you'll have on the Windows platform a little thing that says activate Steinberg power scheme. So, try to make sure that you're activating that. 'Cause sometimes what happens is different laptops to kind of gain, because one of their biggest metrics is battery life. So for a laptop to get like, oh wow, it's an amazing, battery life, what they do is they throttle the CPU down. So parts of if you leave your computer idle, it may actually just get to the point where, it's unloading stuff is asleep, the hard drives aren't spinning the same way. So different things. So that could cause the irregularities that you're seeing. All right, with that, let's see how we're doing on time. All right, you got just about 2 or 3 minutes. Thanks for all the wonderful questions, and I'll go back to our live questions. My son is anxious for me. You may hear him knocking on the door. All right, so we see question, is Steinberg planning to create a new controller to replace the CC121? Currently, it's very difficult to find in stores. So the CC121 was kind of a victim of supply shortages for parts. So it was discontinued last year. So that's why it's kind of difficult to find in stores. So, and, it's kind of more of a, it's manufactured by Yamaha and kind of in conjunction with planning from Steinberg. So we'll have to see if Yamaha is deciding to kind of make one for Steinberg. I hope that they will do it. Question: will the USB dongle still have a use in Cubase 12? So if you're running like Steinberg virtual instruments that aren't on a new licensing system, like Halion 6 or Halion Sonic, some of those would, or Wavelab, those would still require the USB E licenser. But to run just the components of Cubase 12, you won't need the USB E licenser. All right, we'll see how we're doing on time. All right, I think we get maybe one more quick question in. We'll take a look, see. Okay, as we see, a nice comment from Steve Leeds. As always, thankful for you, Greg, and Steinberg, for walking us around Cubase. So you're welcome. We're glad to be able to offer this as a service to help our customers. All right, so I just see a question. Do you use a pen tablet or a trackball? So I just use a regular mouse. I used to have trackpads and trackballs, and I like having the scroll wheel is such an essential part for me. So I just use everything with a mouse. All right. So I just see a comment, make the tutorial how to control Digitech Whammy WH4 in Cubase with program change, also expression. So I don't have one of those pedals, so I would do a tutorial if I had a pedal and didn't have to use a camera. Okay, so with that, I guess we hit the end of the comments. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all for the wonderful questions and discussion. We'll be doing the same live stream starting on Friday at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern. I want everyone to stay safe and healthy, and look forward to everyone's great questions, and look forward to spending time with you on Friday. Everyone stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you Friday. Goodbye.